Hey guys, welcome back to State of Independence. This is not a podcast episode, but we're going to start a new discussion series called The Men Who Bought America. You may remember the popular series on the History Channel, The Men Who Built America, but we're going to discuss how rich and powerful business owners bought influence throughout the United States government over 100 years ago. So let's get into it. And remember to like and subscribe. Your support really is appreciated. Okay, now an interesting reference for this story to start off is in 1912, the Titanic sank. Now, on the Titanic were three rich and powerful individuals that were John J. Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. These three individuals were very against forming a central bank. They wanted to keep separate banks as they were. They were very against the idea of like a Federal Reserve central banking system. Now, the Titanic was owned by J.P. Morgan. He was going to be on the Titanic, but he canceled at the last minute. Now, these three powerful men died whenever the Titanic sank. So most of the powerful resistance that had influence died when the ship sank. So the next year in 1913 is when the Federal Reserve was formed. Now, the Federal Reserve was cooked up by a few different people. Mainly, it was by Warburg and the Rothschild family. J.P. Morgan had influence. A few other people had influence in it. But Paul Warburg wrote the Federal Reserve Plan. Paul Warburg was a German Jewish banker that had ties to the Rothschild family. Now, he met with J.P. Morgan and other powerful individuals at Jekyll Island, Georgia in 1913 secretly to discuss the Federal Reserve and to write the plan for it. This Paul Warburg guy basically wrote the entire system of the Federal Reserve and pointed out to all these powerful men how good it could do them and why they needed to do it. So they all agreed. And then the Federal Reserve Act, when it was passed, it was very suspicious how it was passed. It was passed on Christmas when most of the politicians were away, and they called a vote and it barely passed. It was, I'm sorry, I forgot some of the details on that one. I'm going to look that up, and we're going to do a separate episode probably around that. But yeah, they met at Jekyll Island, made this agreement. The Federal Reserve was created. Okay, now after the Federal Reserve was created, you have this central bank that is not really an entity of the government. It's not a part of the federal government at all. It is literally just a cartel of powerful banks that have gotten together and have decided that they can control how much money is in supply at one time. And then they set an interest rate to it. And so what makes this even worse is 20 years later, FDR, because of the Great Depression. Okay, in 1929, the Great Depression happened and the stock market completely crashed, and it caused people to absolutely panic and all go to their banks and get their savings. But when they got their savings out of the bank, they weren't getting paper money, they were getting gold. They wanted their gold bullion. They wanted their bars, their coins, everything, because they knew that gold had real value, that it would stay valuable while paper money was fluctuating. So they went and took as much of the gold out of the banks as people could get. There were banks closing their doors and telling people that they couldn't have their savings. There were riots forming. It was a disaster. So one of the fixes that FDR cooked up to help the economy and to fix the bank and to kind of put more strength into the dollar and to give more people trust in the use of the dollar, he passed a law that would actually confiscate all of the gold savings from every U.S. citizen. Every private reserve of gold the U.S. citizens had, it was now illegal to own over a very small amount. So they seized everything from everyone. And they said it was up to a 10-year prison sentence if you were caught not giving your gold over. Now, they set the price at $20.67 at the time in 1933 when they bought everybody's gold back. And they said that that was fair market price at the time. It was actually kind of low. And they raised it up again later, but it was pretty bad. And then there were a few citizens that even got lawyers and had very good cases of saying why they shouldn't have to give all of their gold away. And the government was not on anybody's side. They didn't care. They said, give us the gold. You have no rights. Give us the gold. So in total, they confiscated 3,600 tons of gold bullion. Now, if that was made into bars and stacked up, it would be as tall as Mount Everest. That is when Fort Knox was created. That's whenever you had the most secure facility in the world, to this day still almost, created to house this much gold. And since then, the Federal Reserve has continued to print and print and print more money, because when the federal government confiscated that much gold and took all of that out of supply, and money was not backed by gold anymore, it didn't have a real value anymore. Previously, you only had so much money because there's only so much gold and only so much resources. So there's only a limited amount of money for a budget. There's only so many things you can do. We used to not have budget deficits. We used to not overspend like we did. So over the years, the federal government has want more and more and more money. They've become greedy. They've gotten these gigantic budgets. The military has grown exponentially since World War II and up. I mean, through World War II, and then the military-industrial complex makes a lot of money off of this whole war game. Every time that we spend billions of dollars going to another useless war, it's crazy. So and then the pandemic, when everybody got stimulus checks, they printed a lot of money just to give money to people. So every time the government has this big project that they want a bunch of money for, and there's obviously not enough there to run off of, they turn to the Federal Reserve and they say, print more money. And that ends up being a tax on us because it makes our money less valuable. That's why they took the gold away. The gold retained value. So if you had X amount of ounces of gold, it usually goes up in value over time to keep up with the inflation of paper money. So gold right now is somewhere around $3,000 an ounce, when at the time when FDR confiscated it, it was worth $20.67. So that should show you right there. Every time they print money, they take a little bit of money away from you. It's a tax. It's just like whenever we were going to go to the Iraq War and Afghanistan War, what if your politicians came to you and they said, hey, we're going to go kill a bunch of people in the Middle East. We're going to secure oil reserves. We're going to try to create a democracy in another Middle Eastern country. And we're also going to tax you 20% in order to do all that. You would say, hell no, why would I ever support that? Well, what they did was they went and printed a bunch of money to pay for the military budget, and they got their money out of you anyway. Because if you're not going to pay the 20% tax that they want to pay for this war, your steak at the grocery store is going to cost 20% more because they just printed a bunch of money. It's become a way to take our money without consent. So the Federal Reserve and the confiscation of gold over this period of time, over 180 years that the gold has been gone, or 100 years the Federal Reserve has existed and 80 years that the gold has been gone, you've seen the US dollar actually go down in value 96%. It is 96% weaker than when the Federal Reserve was started in 1913. And people don't have the gold reserves that they used to, and you can't get them like you could before because it's $3,000 an ounce. It's almost impossible to get into. So if you have savings in the bank right now and they decide that the Federal Reserve is going to print more money and it makes everything cost a little bit more because of inflation, they just took a little bit of money out of your bank account. It's the same thing. So we have got to get together and open our eyes and start saying that we're not going to put up with this anymore, because they're just printing a bunch of paper money like it's a game so they can pay for every $1 billion expense that they want. And at the end of the day, it affects us and it makes us to where it's hard to pay for groceries. There's enough food in the world for everybody to be fed. Groceries should not be the concern and the expense at the end of the day. Groceries should be cheap. And because of all these wars and because of all of this other stuff, we're having to pay for it as a people. And where has it gotten us? We're $36 trillion in debt. And working on much more than that. I'm pretty sure the most recent budget just added $2 to $4 trillion to the overall deficit over the next 5 years. So how has it helped us? We've switched to a Federal Reserve that just prints unlimited amount of money. They get to spend it whenever they want. It makes it worth less to us, and we now owe $36 trillion. It's none of this has helped us. It's hurt us every bit of the way. The Federal Reserve needs to be abolished, and money needs to be returned back to some kind of standard of gold, silver, resources, or something else that it's actually backed by. Because at the end of the day, there's only a limited amount of said resources or said backing, and you can't just come up with all these projects where you just burn $20 billion off every year because you just can. So the world is going in a bad direction financially. That is where the United States has been going financially for the past 100 years because of the Federal Reserve. And if we all become a little bit more informed about it, and we all expect better leadership and better change in the future, then maybe it'll get somewhere. But all we can do is try. You guys have a good one.